Hello. So before I started this class, I really did have a limited understanding of what addiction was. And to be honest, I mostly thought of it as something people got into because they have poor choices or they just have a lack of willpower in life. And I associated addiction mainly with drugs and alcohol, which is the one I was most familiar with. And I didn't realize how deeply rooted it can be, where it can be impacted by trauma, mental health, and even genetics can tie into it a lot. And I definitely didn't know how wide the spectrum of addiction was, including the processing disorders that I have learned about, like gambling, gaming, or even social media. As I went through this class, my perspective completely shifted. I learned that addiction is not just a bad habit, it's a disease that really affects and changes the brain. It affects things like impulse control, a person's judgment, and even the brain's ability to feel pleasure in normal ways. That really helped me understand why people just simply can't stop, even when they really want to. I also found it eye-opening to learn how trauma and stress, especially early on in life, can make someone more vulnerable to addiction. One of the most powerful takeaways for me was learning that addiction isn't always about substances. Like processing addictions like compulsive shopping, internet use, or even exercise can be just as harmful because they often serve the same purpose as a substance, whether it's just numbing pain or even filling some kind of emotional void. In terms of the government's role, I think it's essential that there is a balance. I feel like the government does have the duty to regulate harmful substances to keep people safe, like things like age restrictions on things, prescription monitoring, or banning dangerous synthetic drugs. But honestly, I also think it's crucial that we don't approach addiction only through punishment, because punishment just makes people go in denial and shame more. But more resources should go into prevention, education, mental health care, which I believe is really big in this country now, is mental health disorders and even treatment programs, not just incarceration. We've seen that criminalizing addiction can really does make things really worse, especially for lower income communities and marginalized communities, where honestly that's all they know and they have nowhere else to go. So how we can protect ourselves and the people we care about, I think it really does start with awareness and open communication, understanding what addiction is, recognizing the early signs, and being able to talk about it without shame is definitely really huge. And setting healthy boundaries with things like alcohol, technology, and even work is super important. And when I think someone is struggling, offering support instead of judgment can make a huge difference, and you can catch it early on enough to where you can get help. For myself, I try to stay mindful of how to cope with stress and emotions. Since I do have an anxiety disorder, I definitely understand that a lot, knowing how to cope with stress and emotions and making sure you check in with them regularly, because if I notice a behavior change, I definitely want to be there for them instead of being cruel to them. In the end, this class didn't just teach me about addiction, it taught me about compassion, resilience, and even the importance of community and healing. And that's something that I will definitely carry on with me for life and in my future career as I finish up my bachelor's degree in recreational therapy at ECU. I appreciate you teaching this class. I've learned so much, and thank you for listening. Bye.